Most people think Ford's flathead V8 was their biggest engine mistake of the 50s. You've probably heard the stories about overheating, cracked blocks, and mechanics who refused to work on them. But if you thought the flathead was Ford's worst engine nightmare, you're wrong. What you didn't know is that Ford created something even more controversial. An engine so strange that mechanics nicknamed it the bad breather, and hot rodders avoided it for decades. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 20 shocking secrets about the Ford Y-Block V8 that changed everything we thought we knew about 50s Ford performance, including one that proves this terrible engine could actually destroy modern V8s on the track. Ford Y-Block, named for deep skirt block design. The Y-Block got its name from something you'd never see unless you flip the engine upside down. Ford engineers designed the crankcase walls to drop way below the crankshaft centerline, creating a rigid Y-shaped bottom end that looked nothing like any V8 before it. This deep skirt design added serious weight, about 50 pounds more than competitors, but Ford had a reason. They wanted an engine block so stiff it could handle the punishment of higher compression ratios and increased power outputs that were coming in the mid-50s. The extra material meant the bottom end was practically bulletproof, resisting the twisting forces that cracked lesser blocks. Problem was, that weight penalty made the Y-Block a pig in lightweight hot rods, and racers quickly learned that no amount of block strength could overcome physics when you're trying to accelerate. The irony? That overbuilt bottom end is exactly why surviving Y-Blocks today can be built to handle 700 horsepower, something Ford never imagined when they were drawing up plans in 1952. First post-flathead OHV V8 arrived in 1954. Ford shook the automotive world in 1954 when they finally killed off the side valve flathead and introduced overhead valves to their V8 lineup. The timing wasn't coincidental. Chevrolet and Chrysler were eating Ford's lunch with their modern OHV designs, and Ford dealers were screaming for something competitive. The new Y-Block immediately boosted power from the flathead's 85 horsepower to 130, while RPM capability jumped from 3,800 to nearly 5,000. Engineers achieved this by moving the valves up into the cylinder heads, allowing for larger valve diameters and better breathing. The combustion chambers could finally be designed for efficiency rather than working around side-mounted valves. Ford's marketing department went wild, plastering overhead valve V8 on everything from dealer posters to owner's manuals. What they didn't advertise was that this rush-to-market engine came with a host of teething problems that would haunt Ford for years. Still, that first Y-Block in 1954 represented Ford's biggest technological leap since the original flathead V8 in 1932. Early rocker oiling system created sludge nightmares. Here's where the Y-Block earned its reputation as a mechanic's nightmare. Ford engineers routed oil to the rocker arms through a passage that started at the center cam bearing, traveled up through the block and heads, then fed the rocker shafts. Sounds simple enough until you factor in 1950s oil quality. Those old oils turned to sludge faster than modern synthetics, and guess where that sludge loved to accumulate? Right in those narrow oil passages leading to the rockers. Mechanics would tear down Y-Blocks with less than 20,000 miles to find the rocker arms running completely dry, metal grinding on metal. The fix became legendary. Drill and tap the block for external oil lines that bypass the internal passages entirely. You'd see these copper or steel lines running up the outside of the engine like medical IVs keeping a patient alive. Ford stubbornly refused to acknowledge the problem officially, but by 1957, aftermarket companies were selling complete external oiling kits. Today's Y-Block builders still debate whether to keep the original internal oiling or go with the proven external setup. Stacked intake ports looked clever but strangled flow. Ford's engineers faced a packaging nightmare when designing the Y-Block cylinder heads. They needed room for push rods, equal-length intake runners, and ports that would actually flow air. Their solution? Stack the intake ports vertically, one over the other, creating what looked like a figure 8 when viewed from the intake face. On paper, this was genius. Both ports for each cylinder got identical runner lengths, theoretically providing equal fuel distribution. The push rods passed right between the stacked ports without interference, but in the real world, those ports were a disaster for performance. The shape created turbulence that killed high RPM breathing, and porting them for better flow was nearly impossible without breaking through into the push rod passages. Hot rodders discovered that even mild cam upgrades would expose the breathing limitations, causing power to nosedive after 4,000 RPM. The design was so restrictive that when Ford finally redesigned the heads in 1957, they claimed a 20% flow improvement just from reshaping the ports. Yet those same terrible breathing heads are now coveted by restorers who want authenticity over performance. Healthy Y blocks can scream past 7,000 RPM. Wait, didn't we just say these engines couldn't breathe? Here's the shocker. Despite the Y block's bad breather reputation, properly built examples can spin to 7,000 RPM and beyond without grenading. The secret lies in that overbuilt bottom end we mentioned earlier. The deep skirt block, forged steel crankshaft, and beefy connecting rods create a rotating assembly that's practically indestructible when balanced correctly. Modern builders have learned tricks the original Ford engineers never imagined: offset grinding the crank for longer stroke, installing longer rods for better rod ratio, and using custom pistons that reduce reciprocating weight. Add a solid roller cam, properly ported heads, or aftermarket aluminum ones, and careful attention to valve spring selection, and suddenly that wheezing Y-block transforms into a high-winding screamer. John Cossey proved this dramatically when his Y-block won the Engine Masters Challenge, spinning past 7,000 RPM while making over 600 horsepower. The engine that mechanics once called a boat anchor was actually a sleeping giant waiting for someone smart enough to wake it up. Distributor location makes Y-block instantly recognizable. You can spot a Y-block from across a parking lot thanks to one weird design choice. Ford stuck the distributor at the back of the engine, offset to the passenger side, while Chevy and Chrysler put their distributors up front where mechanics could easily reach them. Ford engineers apparently enjoyed making life difficult. This rear placement meant the distributor was practically touching the firewall in most installations, turning simple timing adjustments into a game of automotive yoga. The offset position was necessary because of the Y-block's unique lifter galley design, but it created headaches for hot rodders trying to run aftermarket ignition systems. Those old-school Suntacks with the sending unit on the distributor? Forget it. No room. Want to run a crank trigger ignition? Better start cutting the firewall. The placement did have one advantage, though. It left the front of the engine clean for accessories and made the Y-block easy to identify in junkyards. Even today, that rear distributor remains the quickest way to spot a Y-block among a sea of small block Fords. Valve covers attached with just 2 studs each. If the rear distributor didn't give it away, the Y-block's bizarre valve covers certainly would. Ford engineers designed these stamped steel covers with pronounced domes to clear the rocker arms, but here's the weird part. They attached with just 2 studs per cover, one at each end. Every other V8 manufacturer used 4, 6, or even 8 bolts to ensure a good seal, but Ford figured 2 was plenty. Predictably, those covers leaked like sieves, coating the engine in a perpetual film of oil. The minimal attachment points meant the covers would warp, especially after ham-fisted mechanics over-torqued them trying to stop leaks. Ford's solution? They didn't have one. Aftermarket companies rushed to fill the gap with cast aluminum covers featuring proper bolt patterns, but Ford stubbornly kept the 2-stud design through the entire Y-block production run. Today, those leaky original covers are worth serious money to restorers, who apparently enjoy authentic oil leaks. Smart builders use modern gaskets and careful torquing to minimize seepage. But a Y block without some valve cover weeping just doesn't look right. Engine sizes ranged from tiny 239 to mighty 312. Ford's Y-block family tree included more displacement variations than a Swiss Army knife has blades. The baby of the bunch was the 239 cubic inch version, introduced in 1954 for base model cars. Mercury got its own exclusive 256 cube variant because heaven forbid Mercury and Ford share anything in the 50s. The 272 became the mainstream engine, powering millions of Ford sedans and wagons. Moving up the ladder, the 292 served as the workhorse for trucks and performance-oriented cars, offering a perfect balance of power and durability. But the king of the hill was the 312, reserved for high-end Fords, Mercurys, and the glamorous Thunderbird. Each size used different bore and stroke combinations, though they all shared the same basic architecture. The 312 got there with a 3.8-inch bore and 3.44-inch stroke, making it relatively over-square for the era. Interestingly, Argentina kept producing the 292 into the 1980s, long after Ford USA had moved on to the FE series. Today, finding a genuine 312 block is like striking gold for Y-block enthusiasts. 1957 F-Code 312, packed factory. Supercharger Ford decided to go completely insane in 1957 with the F-Code 312, stuffing a Paxton McCulloch VR57 centrifugal supercharger under the hood along with a Holley 4-barrel carburetor. This wasn't some dealer-installed option. Ford built these blown Y-blocks right on the assembly line, making them the first factory supercharged engines from the Blue Oval. The setup was good for an even 300 horsepower, astronomical for 1957. The supercharger spun up to 25,000 RPM, driven by a special bracket and pulley system that looked like something from a mad scientist's laboratory. These engines came with strengthened internals, including forged pistons and special rings designed to handle boost. The package cost a whopping $500 extra, serious money when a base Ford started at $2,000. Production numbers were tiny, with most estimates putting total F-Code production under 2,000 units. The complexity scared off many buyers, and warranty claims for blown head gaskets didn't help. Today, finding a complete original F-Code setup is the holy grail for Y-block collectors, with pristine examples commanding six figures. Dual quad setups used Holley 4000 Teapot carbs. Before the F-Code supercharged engines stole the show, Ford offered dual 4-barrel setups on 1957 E-Code and F-Code 312s. But these weren't your typical Carter or Rochester carbs. Ford specified the unusual Holley 4000 series, nicknamed Teapots, for their distinctive round fuel bowl shape. Each carburetor flowed about 400 CFM, giving the dual quad setup 800 CFM total, plenty for a 312. The Holley 4000 was Ford Motor Company's baby, designed specifically for their engines in the mid-50s. These carbs featured a unique concentric float bowl design that kept fuel centered over the main jets, reducing starvation during hard cornering. The dual quad intake manifold was a work of art, with long runners designed to boost mid-range torque. Problem was, synchronizing two teapots required patience and a good ear. Get them slightly off and the engine ran like garbage. Parts availability killed many of these setups over the years, as Holley discontinued support by the early 60s. Today, restored Teapot carbs sell for more than modern Holleys, and finding a complete dual quad setup can cost $5,000 or more. Holley 4000 was Fomoco's mid-50s 4-barrel standard. That quirky Holley 4000 Teapot carburetor wasn't just for dual quad setups. It served as Ford's standard 4-barrel from 1955 through 1957 on 292s and 312s. Ford had worked closely with Holley to develop a carburetor specifically for their engines, resulting in this unusual design that looked nothing like the familiar Holley 4-barrels we know today. The concentric float bowl wrapped around the venturi cluster like a donut, keeping fuel level consistent regardless of vehicle attitude. The choke mechanism was integrated into the main body rather than being a separate assembly. These carbs used a unique throttle linkage that confused mechanics accustomed to other designs. While they performed adequately when new and properly adjusted, the Teapots developed a reputation for hard starting and flooding as they aged. The intricate castings were prone to warping, and the concentric bowl design made rebuilding tricky. By 1958, Ford had seen enough and switched to more conventional carburetor designs. Today, Y-block restorers face a dilemma: hunt for expensive Teapot carburetors to maintain authenticity, or upgrade to modern carbs that actually work reliably. 312 blocks have cast, ECZ'd main bearing caps. Here's the secret Y-block experts use to identify a genuine 312 block without pulling it apart. Check the main bearing cap castings. Real 312 blocks have ECZ'd cast into the main caps, while all other Y blocks wear EBU markings. This is the most reliable external identifier because bore size can be changed through overboring, and external casting numbers can be ground off or damaged. The ECZ'd casting designation indicated the stronger main cap design Ford used exclusively on 312 blocks to handle the increased power and larger bore size. These caps were beefier than standard Y-block pieces, with more material around the bolt bosses and thicker webs. Some builders claim you can also identify a 312 by looking for a tiny raised dot, about aspirin-sized, on the crank flange. But this isn't as reliable as the main cap markings. The different cap design means you can't just bore a 292 out to 312 specs. You need the proper block with ECZ'd caps to handle the stress. This little casting mark has saved countless Y-block hunters from buying rebored 292s being passed off as genuine 312s. 292 lived longest in trucks until 1964. While the Y-block disappeared from Ford cars after 1962, the trusty 292 soldiered on in F-Series trucks for 2 more years. Ford truck buyers appreciated the Y-block's low-end torque and bulletproof bottom end, even if car enthusiasts had moved on to the newer FE series. The truck version of the 292 got heavy-duty treatment with stronger valve springs, a different cam profile optimized for lugging, and a 2-barrel carburetor that emphasized fuel economy over performance. These engines powered everything from farm trucks to delivery vans, racking up hundreds of thousands of miles with basic maintenance. The 292's long stroke, 3.3 inches, made it perfect for truck duty, providing stump-pulling torque from idle. Many of these truck engines survived because they lived easier lives than their car counterparts. Steady RPM, regular oil changes, and no teenage hot rodders trying to make them rev to the moon. Today, these late truck 292s are prized by builders because they got the best of Ford's Y-block improvements, including better oiling passages and stronger main webs. Finding one in a junkyard is like discovering buried treasure. Argentina's Phase 2 Y-block got new heads in 1971. Just when you thought the Y-block story ended in 1964, Ford Argentina said, "Not so fast," and kept building them for another 2 decades. But here's where it gets really interesting. In 1971, Argentine engineers completely redesigned the cylinder heads, creating what they called the Phase 2 Y-block. These new heads featured a revised valve arrangement with an EI-EI pattern, exhaust intake, instead of the original IE-IE layout. This change improved exhaust scavenging and allowed for better port shapes. The Argentine heads also got larger valves, improved combustion chambers, and strengthened rocker arm supports. These engines powered Ford Falcons, F-100 trucks, and even some Fairlanes built specifically for the South American market. The improvements were so significant that modern Y-block builders import these Phase 2 heads when they can find them. The Argentine 292 continued production into the early 1980s, making it one of the longest-running engine designs in Ford history. Imagine explaining to someone in 1982 Detroit that Ford was still building Y-blocks somewhere in the world. They'd think you were crazy. Australia made 272. Its only V8 option down under, Ford Australia took a different approach with the Y-block, selecting the mid-size 272 as their sole V8 offering from 1955 through 1959. While Americans got multiple displacement options, Aussies made do with just the 272 in their locally assembled custom line and mainline models. The Australian-built engines featured some unique differences from their American cousins, including locally sourced electrical components and carburetors adapted for that country's fuel. These engines had to cope with Australia's extreme conditions, brutal heat, endless dirt roads, and distances that made American road trips look like quick jaunts to the store. Ford Australia's engineers tweaked the cooling systems and air cleaners to handle the harsh environment. The 272 proved remarkably well suited to Australian conditions, providing good power while remaining reliable in the outback. When Ford Australia finally moved on to newer engines, many of these Y-blocks found second lives in boats, industrial equipment, and hot rods. Today, Australian Y-block enthusiasts face unique challenges finding parts as their engines mixed American and local components in ways that can confuse even experienced builders. Mushroom-style solid lifters. Added valve train complexity. Ford engineers couldn't just use normal lifters in the Y-block. That would be too easy. Instead, they designed unique mushroom-style solid lifters with heads larger than their bodies, requiring installation from the bottom of the block before the cam went in. This meant you couldn't just slide lifters in from the top like every other engine on the planet. The mushroom design provided more contact area with the cam lobes, theoretically improving durability and allowing for more aggressive cam profiles. But it also meant a simple cam swap turned into a complete bottom-end teardown. Want to change to a different cam profile? Better pull the engine, flip it over, remove the cam, extract all 16 lifters from below, install new lifters, then reinstall the cam. The lifter bores had to be precisely machined to accommodate the mushroom heads while maintaining proper clearances. Some rebuilders would hone the lifter bores oversize and use aftermarket lifters with even larger mushroom heads for better stability. This quirky valve train hardware became another reason hot rodders avoided Y-blocks. Who wants to pull an engine apart just to try a different cam? Later, blocks got deeper, main cap threads and beefier webs. Ford quietly improved the Y-block throughout its production run, with the most significant changes coming to 1959 through 1964 blocks. These later castings featured deeper threads for the main cap bolts, increasing thread engagement from 7 to 11 threads. The main bearing webs got thicker too, adding material where stress concentrations had caused failures in early blocks. Ford also reinforced the areas around the cam bearings and improved the deck surface thickness. These changes came from real-world experience. Ford engineers studied warranty claims and race failures to identify weak points. The later blocks also got improved metallurgy, with better iron alloys that reduced core shift and porosity problems that plagued early castings. Smart Y-block builders actively seek out these later blocks, identified by casting dates and visual inspection of the main web thickness. The difference in strength is dramatic. Early blocks might split at 500 horsepower, while later ones handle 700 without breaking a sweat. It's another example of Ford fixing problems without admitting they existed, quietly making running changes that turned a questionable design into a bulletproof one. John Cassa's Y-block-dominated Engine Masters competition, Think Y-blocks, Can't Make Power? John Cassa shattered that myth when his radically re-engineered Y-block won the Engine Masters Challenge Vintage V8 class, embarrassing big blocks and modern engines alike. Cassi started with a late 312 block and threw every trick in the book at it. Offset ground crank for 3.75 inches of stroke, custom aluminum heads with modern port technology, roller cam with lift that would make a NASCAR engine jealous, and a compression ratio pushing 13:1. The result? Over 600 horsepower from 375 cubic inches, with peak power coming at 6,500 RPM. This from an engine family that supposedly couldn't breathe above 4,000 RPM. Cassi proved that the Y-block's architecture wasn't the limitation. It was 1950s technology holding it back. Modern CNC machining, contemporary metallurgy, and 60 years of accumulated hot rodding knowledge transformed Ford's ugly duckling into a fire-breathing swan. The victory was especially sweet because Cassi competed against builders running Chrysler Hemis and Chevy big blocks, engines with much better reputations. His Y-block didn't just compete, it dominated, forever changing how people view Ford's mistake from the 50s. Thunderbird special branding sold Y-block. Performance Ford's marketing department struck gold when they started slapping Thunderbird special badges on high-performance Y-blocks in the mid-50s. The Thunderbird had captured America's imagination as a personal luxury sports car, and Ford cleverly leveraged that glamour to sell engines in mundane sedans. A 292 or 312 with Thunderbird special valve covers and air cleaner suddenly seemed exotic, even if it was powering Mom's country sedan wagon. The branding was more than just decals. These engines often got 4-barrel carbs, dual exhausts, and higher compression ratios. Ford dealers learned that customers would pay extra for anything with Thunderbird in the name. The strategy worked so well that Mercury copied it with their own Turnpike Cruiser engine designation. These marketing names helped establish the Y-block as more than just basic transportation power. They created an emotional connection between buyers and their engines, something that General Motors and Chrysler hadn't figured out yet. Today, those Thunderbird special air cleaners and valve covers command premium prices at swap meets, proof that good marketing becomes collectible history. Y-block legacy lived on overseas. After U.S. production ended, when Ford pulled the plug on U.S. Y-block production in 1964, they didn't scrap the tooling, they shipped it around the world. We already mentioned Argentina and Australia, but Y-blocks also found new life in Brazil, where they powered everything from pickup trucks to marine applications into the 1980s. European Ford subsidiaries used imported Y-blocks in some commercial vehicles. The engine's simple design and proven durability made it perfect for developing markets where sophisticated service facilities didn't exist. These overseas Y-blocks often featured locally developed improvements that U.S. versions never got: better head gaskets, improved cooling passages, and upgraded oiling systems. Some Brazilian-built engines even got metric fasteners, creating interesting challenges for modern restorers trying to source hardware. The global Y-block diaspora means that parts and knowledge exist worldwide, with online forums connecting enthusiasts from Detroit to Buenos Aires. It's ironic that an engine many Americans dismissed as obsolete continued serving reliably on 6 continents for decades after Ford moved on to better designs. The Y-block's international longevity proves that sometimes simple and tough beats sophisticated and temperamental. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss the next one. See you there.